In the words of Dan Lanning, you guys know we're playing Rutgers, right? It's time to look ahead and look forward with a full scouting report on the boys from Piscataway and a complete preview and prediction of all things Ducks Scarlet Knights. From coast to coast, we're back in the air and on the air here on That Show Out West.
This place has everything. In fact, the grass is damn green in Eugene.
That performance deserves a holy wallawa.
It's a feeling you cannot explain.
This place is louder than any other venue in the Big Ten.
This program is staged to compete and to win championships.
Welcome to the Big Ten, Oregon.
And welcome to That Show Out West for That Team Out West. I'm Ted LaRue. I've been hanging on to something that I've wanted to say really since the victory over Penn State, and now especially since the loss against Indiana. I know everybody was very emotional, of course, on Sunday, going over to Monday, and even bleeding maybe a little bit into Tuesday in the middle of the week as well. But now that we've gotten to the end of the week, I think I'm ready to maybe say the quiet part out loud. And before I say the quiet part out loud, I want to make sure that this is said. Look, if you're a fan of a team, you want them to be as successful as they possibly can. You want them to win every single game when they trot out on a football field. But winning every single game, going undefeated and especially with the disparity of talent with NIL and portal in this current era, it is next to impossible to go undefeated. Ohio State look how many guys went into the NFL from that team last year, and that's a team that lost 2 games a year ago. Coming into the season, I said, I'd almost like to be in a situation where Oregon is not playing in the Big Ten championship game, where they have the loss. So, saying the quiet part out loud, I'm kind of glad the Ducks took the L. Because after that Penn State game, I looked at the rest of the schedule. I knew Indiana was a good team, but I didn't know maybe they were a great or an elite team. I think they maybe proved to be inside Autzen Stadium. I thought after that Penn State game, and I'm like, oh, this is a team. It's a young team. It's an impressionable team, right? I said that during the preseason. If you've been watching TSOW, you kind of know my feelings on that. But I'm like, if this young team continues to win, that puts a lot more pressure. I saw what happened last year, right? When you keep on winning, that continues to put more pressure and more pressure and more pressure on you. Whereas if you can take a loss in the middle of the year, and even like Ohio State, you take a loss at the end of the year, these are things that you can learn from. These are things that you can use as a coaching staff to be able to refocus your football team, I think, as it goes throughout right now. Like a lot of people, including myself, through 5 games of on-field data, we're crowning Oregon. It was Ohio State, it was Oregon, it was Miami. Those were the national championship favorites. And now we've really swapped Oregon with Indiana, and now the pressure is on them to be able to keep on winning, for them to continue to be able to be successful and continue to be impressive, and Fernando Mendoza to be that Heisman Trophy candidate, and so on and so forth. Now, Oregon maybe being humbled at home a little bit, it maybe gets them a little bit pissed off. It maybe gets them a little bit motivated. It maybe gets them a little bit angry. And, you avoid complacency when you have maybe results like this throughout the season. And a lot of people have taken Oregon out of that conversation based on the performance that we saw last Saturday in Eugene. And now maybe Oregon is able to take control of that underdog role a little bit. Everybody kind of putting them now on the outside looking in. But maybe this is the opportunity for them to really fix the issues that they have present, really get rolling, headed into maybe those West Coast rivalries at the end of the season. And like I said, at the beginning of the season, when it was 80 degrees and sunny outside, I said, this is a team. I don't care about anything in September, really. I don't care about anything in October. I care what's happening at the end of November. I care what is happening in December and into January. That's what I care about. And if a loss helps you play better, I was talking about Penn State then, but now I'm talking about Indiana now. But if the loss helps you play better at that point in time, then so be it. And I think that loss is, in the end, against Indiana, in the end is going to help Oregon as we go forward. And now it is time to move forward and talk all things Rutgers Scarlet Knights game that's going to be happening this Saturday night all the way out on the East Coast in New Jersey. And they are going to be wearing some uniforms in that matchup that everybody has been clamoring for. Everybody has been waiting for. Da 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 da. That's right. The Stormtroopers are back. They have returned. We're talking white cleats. We're talking white socks. We're talking white pants. We're talking white jerseys. We're talking white helmets. And I know there was maybe some scuttlebutt that says, hey, what if Oregon wore the Stormtroopers? What if Oregon wore the all whites during the whiteout in Happy Valley? Well, it was like blending into what the home crowd, 100,000 people are wearing. Maybe not the best idea. I'm kind of glad they went with the black contrasting look, but considering Rutgers, I mean, red and black are their school colors. This game is going to be under the lights at night. I think this is a really good choice to be able to wear those all whites. A little bit of hint of green, I think, in the number. It's a very dark green and, kind of those black wings on the helmet and the old black swoosh, Nike swoosh on the cleats as well. These look really sharp, but where do they stack up in my uniform power rankings? These are kind of icy white uniforms, but it might be time for a spicy hot take. These are 5 out of 7 for me. I know a lot of people, there's a segment of the Oregon fan base that love the Stormtrooper uniforms. Of course, great memories, that Kenyon Barner game, I believe, against USC all those years ago when they were wearing these types of uniforms. But for me, I just, like I said, I'm a big fan of the contrast in colors on a specific uniform. I'm putting the mummy duck uniforms that they wore against Penn State over this right now. I love the mummy sleeves. I love kind of the alternate logo. That's maybe something that put that uniform above this Stormtroopers uniform at this moment in time. But I kind of look at some of these others. It's just like, I love when they mix in as many colors as they possibly can right now. So that's just me. That's just my personal preference. I think at this moment in time, I think the Stormtrooper is a really good uniform, and I think it means a lot to a lot of people, but I'm putting it at number 5 right now out of number 7. So my updated uniform power rankings, we've got the Shoe Duck, of course, at number 1. We've got the uniform they wore against Indiana sitting there at number 2. Man, when I saw that on Saturday, I'm like, oof. Is that a 1B? It might be. We've got the uniform that they wore against Northwestern with the yellow helmet, yellow pants, the green O on the helmet. We've got the Mummy Duck at number 4. We've got the Stormtrooper at number 5. We've got the more traditional looking uniform with the winged helmet that they wore against Montana State at number 6. And we've got the all greens that they wore against Oklahoma State sitting there at number 7. Well, we're certainly not in the Pac-12 anymore. Oregon is set to fly from one edge of the continent all the way out to the other, to New Jersey, for a conference game, their longest road trip for a conference opponent in school history. What a great time to dive into our TSOW scouting report so you know the foe before Saturday night. The Rutgers Scarlet Knights started off 3-0, but now have lost 3 consecutive conference games to Iowa, Minnesota, and Washington to start their first half of the season. Of course, Greg Schiano is the head coach of this program. He is in his 6th year, in his 2nd stint as the head coach of the Scarlet Knights. He is 97 and 104 overall if you combine his Big Ten stint and then the stint when Rutgers was in the old Big East Conference. Remember that? So when I dive into this team and I dive into what I tend to know about Rutgers, of course, covering them over on the Big Ten side of what I do, normally Rutgers is a team that is very much invested in the run game, isn't very dynamic as far as the pass game and moving the football down the field. This thing is completely flipped. It is a 180 for Scarlet Knights football out there in New Jersey. The offense is a strength this season. Not only the offense, but the passing offense. This is a squad that can push the ball down the field and can be a legitimate threat to secondaries on the other side of the football. It all starts with their quarterback, Ethan Kaliakmanis. He started his career over at Minnesota. He was a 4-star high school recruit coming out of the state of Illinois. Didn't really work out for the Golden Gophers. He transferred over to Rutgers because that's where his former offensive coordinator, Kirk Shiraka, who's still the offensive coordinator at Rutgers, he was with P.J. Fleck at Minnesota. So that's kind of the combination of why Ethan landed in Piscataway. Ethan has been a little bit of a roller coaster at times in his career. He's had his ups, he's had his downs, he's been inconsistent. But this year, he seemed to really put it all together. He's the third leading passer in the Big Ten, over 1,700 yards so far, 11 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. He just seems a lot more confident of where he's going with the football. And, you know, for some guys, it kind of takes them a lot longer. They need to be kind of in the right spot at the right system. And it seems like Ethan is in that type of situation right now with the Scarlet Knights. And I think one of the big reasons why Ethan, you got to give certainly 16 a lot of credit for his development. But another big reason is this is one thing, we talk about this flip offensively at Rutgers and their philosophy, is they actually have guys that at wide receiver that can actually get open, that can separate, that can create, that can catch and run, that can do all of the things that you and I might be used to seeing like Oregon be able to do at the wide receiver position. Ian Strong, KJ Duff, and transfer DT Sheffield form a really good trio in this passing attack right now. Strong is one of the best receivers, maybe talent-wise and statistically, definitely statistically, we'll just put it that way, in the Big Ten right now. 537 yards and 2 scores. That's good enough for third in the conference in receiving yards. And here's the thing about Rutgers receivers, specifically at the X and the Z, specifically on the outside. These are big guys. You look at Strong is 6'3", 211 pounds. KJ Duff, 6'6", 225 pounds. Although this is, I think, a passing offense, and we'll get into this as the scouting report and as this preview progresses. There's it's a offense that I think really finds success in the short passing game. They can certainly take some deep shots, and when they do take those deep shots, it's throwing the ball up and taking advantage of the size that they have out there against some of the smaller defensive backs that they go up against in the Big Ten Conference. Now, you got a smaller, shiftier, quicker type of prototypical slot receiver in DT Sheffield that I mentioned before, has transferred over 394 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, it's a really good trio. That's kind of what, in basketball, they talk about living by the 3 and dying by the 3. And when it comes to these 3, Rutgers is either going to live by it or they're going to die by it as far as their passing game. There's some backs that are catching the balls out of the backfield. There's some tight ends like Kenny Fletcher that's going to get involved before. But, the rest of the team has just 33% of the receptions. So those 3 account for 66% of the passing production so far for the Scarlet Knights. So oppositions, whether it's Oregon or somebody else, they've got to find a way to clue in on those guys and to be able to limit what they do in the passing game. Now, when I take a look at the run game, the last 2 years, they've had one of the best Big Ten's best running backs in Kyle Monangai. Back-to-back years, 1,000 yards. He's in the NFL right now. And he kind of left a big opening. And there was a school of thought coming into the season for the Scarlet Knights that it would be a by-committee approach. I think the injury to FAU transfer C.J. Campbell, he's out for the remainder of the season. That, and then combined with what Antoine Raymond and where he was last year and how he stepped up this year, he has become the bell cow in relief of Monangai on this offense. And he's done a really nice job filling in. He's averaging 5.5 yards per carry and 9 touchdowns, 4th in the Big Ten in rushing yards right now, 2nd in the Big Ten in rushing touchdowns. So he's got a nose for the end zone. He kind of has a very similar pop like Monangai did, kind of going through the hole. Jayshon Benjamin is another okay back behind him, but he has just 3 carries in the last 2 games. So it's very clear that Raymond is going to be the back to get Rutgers going offensively in their run game. So they can do it via the throw. They can do it on the ground as well. This is a Rutgers offense that you need to be aware of, that you cannot take lightly, because they can move the football. they can put up points. I think in some of the games this season, specifically, I think the game against Minnesota where they got out to a lead, and then a game against Washington. In some of these games against Big Ten opponents, they struggle with like consistency over 60 minutes. Like they can start off, and Iowa is another really good example as well, where the Hawkeyes finished strong en route to a 38-28 win in Piscataway earlier in the season on a Friday night. But that's, I think, been the Achilles heel for Rutgers in some of these Big Ten games, where it's just like they can't find a way to sustain this offensive success, for the entire 60 minutes. Now, when you talk that, I'm saying good things about Rutgers offense, and they deserve to have those good things said about them. But I think when you talk about the weakness, and maybe this is a reason why the Scarlet Knights cannot sustain that success for 60 minutes in a football game, like this offensive line is the weakness. And it's really interesting. Because I've talked about this on the Big Ten TED side with Illinois. They're a really experienced group up front, but why aren't they as successful? Sometimes, in fact, most of the time, experience doesn't automatically equal talent, especially when you're at a school that doesn't recruit the highest level of players. I mean, it's a group full of seniors. You have guys that have played in this system for years, like you have a center in Gus Zelinkas, who's a 2-time honorable mention all Big Ten player at Rutgers. But here's, I think, the truth of the matter. Their tackles are not very quick. They're not very agile, and they lack that ability to maybe go up against an edge rusher with quicker feet. And I think that's where things really start to they start to get chopped down a little bit when you look at this offensive line right now. They've allowed 20 sacks, 7 sacks, and 11 TFLs against the Minnesota Golden Gophers. They didn't look great against Washington either. Like, that's going to be the part that you have to attack. When you face Rutgers, you need to attack this offensive line, because over the course of Ethan Kaliakmanis' career, we haven't seen it as much this year, but it's popped up at times. He's been prone to make very poor head-scratching decisions. Over the course of Kaliakmanis' career, it's been like, you see some good things, you see some good throws, but then you see just some eye-popping, what are you doing type of decisions from Kaliakmanis as well. And when the offensive line hasn't been able to hold up and you get pressure on Ethan, he's forced to maybe make decisions sooner than he really wants to make them. That's, I think, where those things mesh together and bad things happen for this Rutgers offense. So although they've been able to put up good production, it's maybe been in spite of their offensive line play so far this season. You go over to the defensive side of the ball, and it's I'll get to this at the end of the scouting report, where it's just like, this team does not look like a Greg Schiano football team of what you might expect. And, the defense and the way it's playing right now is another example of that. Like, this secondary gets beat a lot. Almost everybody that has played Rutgers, even you look at the University of Ohio, what did they put up? 31 points, I believe it was, in the season opener against the Scarlet Knights, but definitely Big Ten opponents. I mean, you got Iowa. Now, Iowa isn't the dumpster fire offensively that it was under Brian Ferentz, but you're still wearing the Tiger Hawk on the side of the helmet. I mean, they're still not going to be an explosive offense, and they put up 38 points, and they look pretty good against this Rutgers defense. The Scarlet Knights has given up the most passing yards and total yards in the Big Ten. I mean, Minnesota threw for 364. DeMond at Washington last week threw for over 400 yards. There's a good amount of transfer talent here at the main positions, at the key positions. It just doesn't seem like they haven't quite got their feet under them, or they certainly haven't been definite upgrades. We're talking about Jacoby Henderson, and we're talking about Cam Miller, who comes over from Penn State. Only Bo Masco has a PFF season coverage grade above 60 at 77.4. So these aren't very talented players there on the outside, and they're giving up a lot of big chunk plays. 32 plays of 20-plus yards this Rutgers defense has given up this season. That's tied for 111th in the country in explosive plays allowed. 22 of the 32 have been via the throw, and that's 105th in the country. So there is yards to be had, whether they're in man coverage, whether they're in zone coverage. There's some missed assignments. There's some blown coverages. I think it was the Washington game. I want to say it could have been somebody else, but there's plays where I'm like, there's nobody within 5, 7 yards of somebody, and they just got the ability to catch and run for another 10 yards before someone even is close to be able to making a play on them. Like, they've allowed 5 pass plays of 40+ yards this season. So there is plenty of openings out there. There is plenty of green grass when you take on this Rutgers defense. They've got a good linebacker in the middle in Dariel Jabome. You really saw him last year when Mohamed Toure got hurt. He stepped in and he really started to come into his own, and he's done pretty well so far this season. They've had some tough injuries really over the last 2 years. Moses Walker was slated to be in that linebacking core. He's out for the season as well. So, it's just lack of talent, lack of experience, some injuries. It's just all kind of really piled up for Rutgers defensively. You look to the defensive line. Now, what did I say last week? I said, well, Indiana's not very big up front, and look what Indiana did. I mean, they owned the line of scrimmage. But the thing about Indiana is they were very athletic. They can move really well. I just don't think that this Rutgers defensive line can move ultra well right now. So they lack size, and I think they lack athleticism. Only one guy, or I should say there's a couple, I think, at 301. I should probably give them a little bit of credit. But like I said, just not nearly as athletic. They generate an okay amount of pressure, but they normally can't finish the job. Bradley Weaver and Eric O'Neill are the presences that you need to keep an eye on off of the edge. Easy for me to say. They've combined for 4 sacks through 6 games. So they've got over 80 pressures this season, but, kind of finishing the job and creating plays behind the line of scrimmage has maybe been a little bit of a challenge so far for Rutgers. And that's like going back a couple of years ago. I remember the same thing. This is a program that has had trouble finishing at the quarterback and creating those plays behind the line of scrimmage. We talked about how they defend against the pass. It's not much better against the run. They give up the 4th most rush yards in the Big Ten. Like Ohio, not Ohio State, Ohio out of the MAC, rushed for 201 yards to open up the year. Iowa rushed for 160. Washington rushed for 177. But I will say this, 134 were from Damon Williams. They just could not contain him and keep him in the pocket. And he was a problem for Rutgers last Friday night. Like, this team, the way it's built, where it's like, hey, they're going to look to throw the ball around a lot. They're not very good in the trenches. Their special teams maybe aren't as good this year. It does not fit a typical Greg Schiano where disciplined, line of scrimmage play, running the football. It's just, and maybe that's kind of, it's morphed into a team where they have to outscore you to win. This is not the style of play that Greg Schiano, I think, really wants to play right now in Piscataway. And that might morph into some struggles. And maybe it's morphed into the struggles that we've seen in some of the Big Ten games that Rutgers has had so far this season. All right, you know the foe. Now it's time to take a look on how the Quack can attack the Scarlet Knights out on the Jersey Shore on Saturday night. The Oregon Ducks, now number 8 in the country, are 17.5-point favorites, going all the way across the country from the Pacific time zone to the Eastern time zone at Rutgers. The over-under is 61.5 points. So Vegas expecting a lot of scoring on Saturday night, 3:30 p.m. Pacific time on the Big Ten Network. Here's the first thing when I look at this game. Before I get into matchups, lines versus lines, or receivers versus defensive backs, or whatever it be, I want to take a look at between the ears. Because in the words of the great Patches O'Houlihan, you got to get mad. You got to get angry. I want to see an edge from this Oregon Ducks team. I want to see them come off of that game that they had last week against the Indiana Hoosiers and play pissed off. I want to see them be ultra motivated. I want to see them come out with a lot of energy. Energy is going to be big because you're traveling all the way across the country. Now, Oregon, there's been other teams West Coast teams and others that have complained about the travel, that have complained about the time zones. One team that hasn't is the Oregon Ducks. Lay the ball down in a parking lot, Dan Lanning says, and let's play some frickin' football right now. So when you have, like, Rutgers is an underrated home atmosphere in the Big Ten. Okay, I completely understand if maybe some of the Oregon fans out there don't maybe know a lot about the Scarlet Knights right now. They're only 10 years into their Big Ten run when they joined the conference in 2014. But they, especially this nighttime atmosphere, people get juiced up out there in Piscataway. So you got to imagine with an opponent like Oregon coming into town that there's going to be a lot of energy. So you need to take the hope, you need to take the energy right out of the building right away. Because the longer that Rutgers can stay in this game, maybe the more plays that they can create, the more confidence that they maybe have into the second quarter, into the third quarter, into the fourth quarter, and so on. And I think there's a lot of opportunities in some of the matchups, which I'll highlight here in just a little bit, for Oregon to just attack them and take care of business, like we all know they really should. So they need to be able to take control. This is a turning point. This is a crossroads right now in this season. How is Oregon going to respond throughout the second half of the year? A game against Rutgers. Of course, you got Wisconsin coming up next week. These are teams that they should control. These are teams that they should take care of. But if you see Rutgers kind of come out of the gate hot, Oregon look a little bit sluggish, and maybe you see some things like that maybe we saw against Indiana start to carry over a little bit. Now we've got some concerns on our hands. So I think we're going to find out a lot early in this matchup. In the middle of the first quarter, later in the first quarter, I think we're going to have a really good gauge. I remember last year's game against Purdue maybe being in a similar instance, even though Purdue was really bad. They're worse than Rutgers is right now, but that was an environment that was, Purdue was also an underrated Big Ten environment a little bit as well. The crowd had a little bit of a juice to it, but Oregon kind of took care of business as time went on. Now, when I really start to dive into the matchups, you need to keep Rutgers wide receivers and this pass game specifically in check. Now, Rutgers has the ability to run the football, but they have a better ability to throw the football. If you shut down this pass game, you're going to shut down Rutgers. That's just the cold hard truth. I want to see a really good response from Theron Johnson and Ife Obadegwu. Both of those guys were attacked against Indiana, and they had a little bit of a rough day. Let's just kind of put it that way. Theron had a 55 PFF coverage grade against the Hoosiers. Ife Obadegwu was at 45.5. They were targeted 9 times, and they had allowed 6 receptions for 74 yards. Brandon Finney was great on his side of the field, and I'm expecting him to be able to lock down on his opposition in this game against Rutgers, but I'm looking for those guys specifically to be able to bounce back, and I think you need those guys to be able to really bounce back and gain a lot of confidence. So Rutgers is going to want to get rid of the football quickly. They do not have a very good offensive line, as I touched on in the scouting report. So I think the longer developing stuff, it's just not going to happen, I think, this season. Like, Ethan Kaliak-Manis is very much, this Rutgers offense is very much a forward-throwing offense. Out of all of the passing attempts, the hundreds of passing attempts that Rutgers has thrown this season, just 2 have been screens. So that's 0.8%. In comparison, Dante Moore in Oregon has thrown 15% of screens. So 210 passing attempts and then 2 via the screen pass. So that's not really something that Oregon needs to really watch out for on the defensive side of the football. This is going to be a team, they're going to run some quick slants, they're going to run some quick outs, and of course they're maybe going to try to work the middle of the field and try to get down the field, I think a little bit more. But especially with what Oregon, I think, has coming off the edge, this is a Rutgers offense. They're going to look to get rid of the football quickly. So how does Oregon really combat that? Physical press man coverage on the outside. I really believe that. Now, when you have bigger-bodied receivers against some of these defensive backs, that could be a little bit more of a challenge. They can use their big body, especially on these in-breaking routes, to kind of post them up a little bit, get in front of the Oregon defensive backs. Then in that case, obviously they need to play at the hip. They need to be able to play behind, and then, not able to, you don't want to obviously, grab the opposition, get called for a penalty, but you need to be able to kind of play on the backside and then be able to reach around and be able to bat that ball away, as you see a lot of guys do. I've seen Sione Lalea, I've seen Brandon Finney do that this season. a good amount. I'm very curious to see with those bigger receivers on the outside, if Sione, with his size, gets a little bit more play, gets a little bit more matchup against like a 6'6" KJ Duff, against a 6'3" Ian Strong. I would not be surprised if that's all the case. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we see, in some form or fashion, a little bit more of a Kingston Lopa. He's also a bigger body. I know he's a safety, but it wouldn't surprise me to see him on the field a little bit more in this ball game as well. But that's the main thing. You got to keep these guys in check. Take off the timing. Disrupt the timing as well. Because if you can do that, if you have Ethan Kaliak-Manis holding onto the football for a longer period of time, he's been proven throughout his college career that he's going to make mistakes. And then also, this kind of leads into that previous point that I made. Can Mateo Uyunglele and Tatum Tuioti have a bounce-back game? Mateo had just 2 pressures against Indiana. Okay, he didn't have a great game. Now, Tatum Tuioti had 6. He had a little bit of a better game. Like, Mateo won 3.2% of his battles. So Indiana did a really good job keeping him at bay. But, as I said in the scouting report, these tackles are not very athletic. They're not very good. And they allow a lot of pressures. So, I think that Kirk Shiraka, the offensive coordinator in Rutgers, understands this. As I said before, I think they're going to look to get rid of the football quickly, but let's see how fast that speed rush can get there. Let's see how much that these edge rushers can really disrupt some things out there. So that's going to be, I think, a big factor. Rutgers tackles have both below a 45 PFF pass block grade out of a true pass set this season. Not very athletic. So I think there's going to be longer developing routes at times for Rutgers. That's the moment where Mateo and Tatum can dominate. And I think they certainly have a big matchup advantage. You get corners that play physical and throw off the timing. You get a really good pass rush, and maybe even from the interior as well, from like an Aiden Breland. He's been in a lot of pass rush packages for the Ducks this season. Of course, guys like Bear Alexander and Amari Washington certainly as well. I want to go to the offensive side of the ball. You know, Dante had a bad day. He had a bad day last week. We've seen Dante Moore this whole season. That 6th game of the year did not look like the previous 5 for Dante. He was hesitant. He was not confident. He was not ripping the throws that we've normally seen him make. And now, you know, when you get the yips a little bit, when you lose your confidence, maybe you get broken up with a little bit, you need, let's just say, a confidence booster. And this seems like the opportunity for Dante to be able to get that confidence back. This is a Rutgers secondary that misses a lot of assignments. There's some blown coverages, and they give up a lot of yards. They give up a lot of production. This is the opportunity for Dante to get that confidence back, to get his mojo back between the ears and really have a lot of success. And it's not only him, but it's the guys he's throwing the football to. I would really like Oregon to see Kenyon Sadiq involved a lot more in this offense. We'll see if they can get him. I mean, they didn't target him at all during the first half of that game against Indiana. Only had a couple of catches in the second half of that game. Like, I look at the talent that they have on the outside with Decorian and Malik. I mean, these guys are just, they have the opportunity to make these Rutgers defensive backs look silly all night long. You know, yeah, could Oregon line up and could they run the ball right at Rutgers? Yeah, they could, but I think the bigger advantage is Dante really throwing the ball over the top, and that's what I want to see. I want to see him really look like we saw him in the first 5 games of this season. Be confident instead of hesitant. That's what I'm looking for from Dante. And I think when Dante is delivering the ball, or even when Will Stein is scheming up run games, get these guys in space at all costs. I mean, the speed advantage that you have, Rutgers does not tackle ultra well in space as well. There's a reason why they give up the yardage and the production that they do so far this season. So I think there could be a lot of success. You get De'Aaron Hill going to the outside. Like, De'Aaron was an absolute non-factor. Technically, he was a negative factor when you factor in his rushing yards. Get him on the perimeter. Get him to the outside. Get him that confidence back. And as far as the running backs go and the running back room, let's trim this thing up a little bit. We saw what? Jay Harris in the first half. I don't need to see Jay Harris. Okay? I mean, it might sound mean. It might sound harsh. I don't need to see him. Right? You know, the days of playing at 4, running back rotation 5. Let's get that thing down. Let's get this thing down to Noah Whittington. Let's get this thing down to De'Aaron Hill. Let's get this thing down to Jordan Davison. If you want to throw in a Jaden Lamar in some situations, fine. But that's where the running back rotation really needs to be, and I would really like to see that really start with Rutgers going forward in this game. All right, folks, it is time for my prediction. You got to get mad. You got to get angry. I think Oregon's going to play with a little bit of an edge in this game. I've got the Ducks taking care of business. Final score, Oregon 41, Rutgers 17. I think Rutgers is going to be able to move the ball throughout this game. I've got my eyes on the Oregon linebackers. That's a group that needs to be able to play better. Are they going to be able to read things correctly as far as where the run lanes are and all of that? So we'll see how that group plays, but I think Rutgers is going to be able to put some points on the board in this game, whether it's later in garbage time or maybe a little bit earlier. They've been better earlier in ball games, but I think Oregon kind of makes a little bit of a statement coming back and says, yeah, we still certainly can be that team that can make a run when all is said and done. So I think the Ducks take care of business. Rutgers isn't going to be able to stop Oregon's pass game. It's going to be a confidence booster coming back. The offensive line, I think, is going to struggle against Oregon's defensive front. I think this is Oregon doing what they are supposed to do in this game. But I've got this one going under. What is that game total? 58? Over under 61.5? I think Vegas is thinking Oregon is going to bounce back in a big way in this game. Another beautiful edition of That Show Out West is in the books. I want to make sure that I say this. I don't love saying it, but I'm going to say it. There will be no live post-game show after the game. I can't believe I'm about to utter these words. I have to go to a wedding on Saturday night. That's not really a wedding. It's just a reception, but that's another conversation for another day. If you want to hear me vent about it, hit me up on the TSOW text line. But anyway, so no post-game show this week. I'll be on, and we'll have our show on Monday to talk all things Oregon and Rutgers. So until then, I'm Ted LaRue. This has been That Show Out West.